What's up everyone? Welcome to Grease Rookie Garage. This episode is going to be part one of fabricating the inner lower fender brace on the Iron 6. And I'm choosing to do this with, or attempting to do this with 22 gauge steel, mainly because you can find that at the big box home improvement stores. Most of you guys probably know that these classic Mustangs are notorious for rusting out in this area. This is the driver's side. I will be working on the passenger side, but the driver's side is very similar to the passenger side in that there is a patch brazed on, and the video is going to start out with me cutting that brazed patch off. The patch on both sides that is put on is actually pulling the fender out of alignment, so that needs to go. All right guys, we're back, and I realized if I'm going to be attempting to repair this inner brace, which attaches, in here to hold the fender in, I need to get the door back on the car and the fender mounted and all my lines set up. So I actually stopped working on it last night to get all this stuff lined up, which, it's pretty good. All my lines are pretty good. So now that I have the door and fender about mounted where it needs to be, I can come in here with this piece cut out and start looking at how this should be working. No, you want some attentions? Is that what's going on? Puppy loves. Puppy loves in the garage. You're the best. You're the best. Also, quick side note, I hung this door last night by myself with the glass in it using this stool from Harbor Freight, and it worked out amazingly well. These things are pretty tough. They hold a lot of weight, and I literally balanced the door on it, positioned the door to where I want it, got it close. I could lift it a little if I needed to. Got everything mounted. It was actually pretty easy, so keep that in mind. If you're looking for a new shop seat, consider getting one of those things because they're reasonably cheap and they're pretty handy. Okay, back to the fender. So first off, I want to point out that this fender was never really mounted well on the car because of this repair work. This lower part of the fender always stuck out. The inner fender structure support was broken and hanging down. So I always knew that there was a problem here, but in putting it back on the car, I was looking at this when I had it off the car trying to figure out what angle this maybe was. But with it back on the car, I can easily tell now that this needs to come up like this, which matches this angle here. And I looked at pictures of this replacement part, and this is about what it looks like. So I can hold this up like this and know that this, and having this like this, the lines match up here. So this is a good starting point for a template to make this piece. I can hold it like this, knowing that in doing this, these lines are going to match up. And then this fender, I can fix this curve later, because I've got plenty of room inside here between this piece and the brace to fold this in as I want it. So with this like this, I'm going to go ahead and make a template. Now that I have a template made, I have a much better idea what these angles should be if I'm going to do some kind of a fabrication job here. All I got to do is line up the tracing that I did. No, I hear you. just like that, and I know that this angle needs to sit right in here about like this, and this has to fit about flush, so we know that this needs to come up some. So what I think I'm going to do, keeping this in mind, is I'm actually going to fabricate a strip right here down to this section here, and then I think with this piece in here, maybe I'm going to cut off this section, cut a piece out for that, and tack that in place. And I'm just going to slowly build this shape. That's my plan. And we'll see where we get. Okay, that is right where it needs to be. And at this point, again, it looks sloppy, but at this point, I'm starting to make something here that could actually hold this fender in place. I don't know if it's going to be, if it's actually going to turn out and if it's going to be usable, but I'm going to keep going at it here, making shapes. Cut those lines out, make a piece of metal to fit in there. Get this thing some strength. Well, it's much stronger now. We're making something. I think we're making something. Okay, so just a little update. Barry, if you guys saw, from Joe Daddy's Garage stopped by the other day and gave me some welding advice and tips and tricks and things like that. So the welding's a little bit further along. Here's some welding he did, which was pretty cool. But I haven't progressed too much on it. The one thing I did do is when the fender was on the car, the lower end here does not run correctly with the door, the passenger's door. I believe the patch that they put on here is actually pulling this out. So I went over to the door and made a template. Let's see if I can show you this with one hand. to find out where the curve should run. And you can see, just by holding it up here and matching it to the curve that is there, that it does absolutely stick outward. This should be up further, which is consistent with where this part of the fender is lying. If you look, this wants to run straight across, which actually runs in line with the fabrication I did here, saying that this should be up in here. And I made the template because as long as I go by this, I'm going to get it reasonably close to where it should be with the door, and I'll be happy with that. So all that being said, I'm going to continue work on this, see how far I get this evening, and yeah, we'll see where we end up. Probably going to clean this up too. I'm going to clean this up because I have to determine how much of this I can use. And probably maybe what I will have to do is clean this up and start bending this back into shape. Although I still have to remove the patch. There's work to be done. We'll figure it out. So I want to point this out quick. The piece that I am attempting to fabricate is a stamped metal piece. So when they do that, obviously the metal can twist and there's different angles and things like that. So it's very difficult to replicate that. So as I go along here to fill in this section, now that I laid in these 3 sections, these angles are going to be difficult to achieve just by laying metal across. So what I'm doing is I'm tacking in pieces, and then I'm going to come along and cut this section off, and I'm going to see if I can fill it in with weld, is what I'm going to try to do. So the piece isn't going to be pretty when it's done. But for this project in particular, if it works and it turns out it's functional and effective, I'm keeping it, and we're going to leave it on the Iron 6. Okay, so it looks like that method is probably going to work for me. I'm able to, like, here's where the metal wants to run, it goes out to here, but I'm filling in these gaps with weld and then quickly grinding it down, and I'll bring it back in as I run these pieces across. This piece does not have to be perfect looking. Again, it just has to be functional. Alright, so you guys can see what I'm doing here. I'm just basically cutting pieces of sheet metal to fit the areas now. I have the main pieces in, and now I'm just filling in the areas and kind of working it into place and twisting it into place as I go. Doesn't look pretty right now, as I've said several times, but again, this piece is more about making something that's functional as opposed to something that looks nice. And I am getting good practice welding, figuring out, again, this is 22 gauge steel. So this stuff's pretty easy to burn through, but one of the reasons I'm doing this, or using 22 gauge steel, is because it's something you can pick up at Lowe's or Home Depot. But I'm going to continue on with this and then grind it down, and we'll take a look at how it ends up. Okay, I had a little more progress on this piece. Now, to give it more strength, I deliberately left this flange here long, this stick out long, because the brace wraps around here. So I'm now going to cut the individual angles here on these lines and then bend this downward to create that lip and then re-weld the seams. Okay, so here's how my lip is turning out, which isn't bad at all. Comes down from here, there's a good transition. Filled in the gaps for the most part with the weld. Ground them down, and we're doing alright. So, again, I'm going to apply all the methods you just saw here to the rest of this piece, and we'll see how it turns out. Stop a little bit of work on the inner brace so that I can address the rest of this patch. I don't know how well you can see it, but the patch that was brazed on was also thicker metal, thicker sheet metal than what was on here. But it ran from here over to there, which I cut off. But here you can get a better idea of, I believe when it was brazed on there, the patch that was put on there wants to pull the fender outward. The fender wants to run over and along through here. So now I've gotten to a point where I'm going to cut this off, leave as much of this edge on here as a reference point, and see what I can do with it. Well, there you have it. There is the original fender. And if you look closely enough, I don't know if you guys can see that, you can just see a little bit of that silver blue. So, I don't know how, I think I have the inner patch here. It's ugly, but the inner brace is to a place, I'll be able to get those to a place where I can use this. And again, I don't care that it's not, you know, factory. Nobody's going to see this as long as it serves the purpose of holding the fender correctly where it should. I'm good with that. Also, I got a lot of practice and experience working on this piece. And it's not done yet, still has a ways to go, but that's good. Next is probably going to be removing as much of this fender as I can, leaving this piece for a guide, and seeing if I can't create a patch that's going to work here. I might end up having to buy an actual patch section, but I'm gonna try it with that 22 gauge steel first. I have enough left of it over there to do this section. And again, this was stuff that I bought from Lowe's, so we'll see what happens. But this is probably a good stopping point for this video, and I'll pick up on part 2 of this in the next episode. Alright guys, that'll do it for this episode. That is part 1. I want to point out that I actually started filming this before Barry from Joe Daddy's Garage showed up to help me sort out some things for the frame on the Iron 6, the frame rails that need straightened out, so that is why this is now following. I do want to wrap this project up before we jump back into the frame rail though, so we can have that done and off of our plate. We'll see. Not 100% sure. Whatever I work on, it's progress either way. So, also I really do want to send out a huge thank you to Barry for making his way up here and helping me out, and even, such a nice guy. This showed up in the mail. He actually bought me the seam buster that he made a comment about in the last episode. So, very nice guy. Check out his channel if by some miracle you're watching my channel and don't know who he is. It is Joe Daddy's Garage, an amazing Mustang master when it comes to, I say he's the Jedi Knight of getting aftermarket sheet metal Mustang parts to fit. So that's all you need to know. All right guys, that's everything for this episode. Until the next one, stay driven.